Wonderful. So I'd like to welcome everyone back to our webinar series. I'm Tawni Tidwell, and we have conversations with Tibetan doctors today. And I'd like to first just start off by introducing a little bit about ATMA and the different webinars that ATMA has been putting on throughout this summer. So the American Tibet Medical Association is a professional organization, a nonprofit dedicated to the promotion and preservation and protection of Tibetan medicine. And it's a all member driven organization that is focused on establishing and maintaining education standards, ethics, professional competency, and licensing for Tibetan medicine. It helps to keep Tibetan medicine as a separate and distinct healing profession. It is also focused on maintaining the relationships between the Tibetan medical community and the Western medical community, as well as the research community. And this year, since the pandemic has started particularly, we've been offering also some free webinars. And the initial set of webinars were focused on Tibetan medical approaches to COVID-19. This is with a lot of our Tibetan physicians in North America, especially as cases started appearing here in North America, as well as our colleagues in Eastern Tibet and Lhasa as COVID cases initially started appearing there in January and February, hearing about their treatment protocols, their research initiatives, and sharing in some of that. The other webinar series is more public, on public health. So this is in English and Tibetan, different webinar events for both language populations. And so this has been those of our physicians in New York, like Dr. Namgyal Tsering, Dr. Kundra Tsejen, Dr. Tuyem Punzok, and then some of our colleagues in public health. This is Dr. Kundra Dorje, Dr. Namgyal Kudo, and then our guest today, Amshi Tenzin Namdul, talking about also intersections between Tibetan medicine and Western medicine, both for patient care, but also for research opportunities. And then the third one that is just about to start is internal, and that's for Tibetan medical physicians, continuing education. We'll have Dr. Kenim Gyamso and Dr. Namil Kusar, who are talking about COVID and what we've been learning in terms of our approaches to COVID patients here in North America, what they're learning as cases start rising in India. And so this webinar series has been really exciting because it's been focused on our Tibetan youth population and young adults, those who are in college, entering college and university, some who are in graduate school, and also those of our non-Tibetan community members who are interested in Tibetan medical education. And so initially it was a thought to introduce Tibetan medical principles to this community. But what we found is actually having conversations with the Tibetan doctors that are in the field, hearing about their stories, hearing about some of their insights, where we're going in the field, where we come from in the field is a good basis before we launch another series on introducing some of the principles. So we've had the really wonderful opportunity to have one of our shining stars, Tenzin Namdul here. She's a University of Texas, Austin rising junior, I believe. Rising senior, finishing junior, and she is a biology and psychology double major, also pre-med. She's very impressive. She's also leading an honors thesis looking at Tibetan medical research, what are barriers to entry of Tibetan medicine in the healthcare profession in the US, and also what are some of the new innovations in terms of research happening in Tibetan medicine. So we've been really grateful to have her help all summer. She's been a fantastic host for this webinar series and in so many other ways. And we're very much looking forward to sharing the rest of the summer before we give her back to her final year as she prepares for entering medical school thereafter. So I will turn it over to Tenzin Namdul. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Tawni, for the great introduction. And for all our viewers, I'd like to say welcome to our third installment of the Tibetan Medicine webinar. And today's topic will be looking at the intersection of Tibetan medicine with also Western research with two really wonderful guest speakers here today, Dr. Tenzin Namdul and Dr. Tawni Tidwell. So I'd love to introduce them and then let them have the stage for the remainder of the time. So our first guest speaker today is Dr. Tenzin Namdul, a Tibetan medicine physician and medical anthropologist. He received his Tibetan medicine degree from Menzinkang Tibetan Medical School in Dharamsala, India, and a PhD from Emory University. Currently, he is a postdoctoral research fellow at the University of Minnesota Division of Epidemiology and Community Health at the School of Public Health, and also a graduate faculty at the Bakken Center for Spirituality and Healing. And our second guest speaker today is Dr. Tawni Tidwell, and she is a Tibetan medical physician and a biocultural anthropologist. She completed the requirements of the Kachupa level of Tibetan medical degree for the first 2 years at Menzinkang in Dharamsala, India as well. And then she completed the last 3 years in Amdo, Eastern Tibet, where she then graduated at Sorig Luling of Qinghai University. Her PhD is from Emory University as well, and she is currently a postdoctoral research associate at the University of Wisconsin-Madison Center for Healthy Minds and a lecturer faculty in the Department of Asian Languages and Culture. So I really look forward to listening to y'all's conversation, and if any viewers have questions during this webinar, you can please feel free to comment them on the ATMA Facebook page, and we will definitely be visiting those at the end. So without further ado, I'd love to pass the stage to Dr. Namdullah and Dr. Tanila.
Great. Wonderful. Thank you so much, Palkyi. I'm really excited for this opportunity. I know Dr. Tenzin Namdul quite well. We worked together for many years, but this opportunity also allows me to ask all sorts of questions. He has a phenomenal background and a phenomenal life story, and I just am so thrilled that we have the opportunity to hear more about that this session, and hopefully more to come as well, and that I get to ask all sorts of questions to share it with you all, but also many that I haven't heard. So first of all, I'd like to start out just asking, so Dr. Tenzin Namdul, as you were former clinical research director at Menzinkang, and you had the opportunity to lead and collaborate on some of those fascinating and exciting clinical studies on Tibetan medicine, from diabetes to ovarian cancer, tuberculosis, hypertension, even one of our most landmark human studies showing that there's no mercury symptoms, cognitive or systemic, from looking at the consumption of one of our important mercury sulfide organometallic compounds. This is for our listeners. It's called Sotel in precious pills. Some of you might be familiar with. And so I'd love to hear if you can tell us a little bit about what were some of your favorite studies during that time as clinical research director, what made them successful collaborations, and how did you feel it contributed to understandings of Tibet medicine or Western understandings of a Tibet medical treatment approach? Thank you.
Thank you. Well, first of all, really thank you for putting this together. It's a great opportunity for all of us to share our stories and our work. Yet at the same time, it feels a little weird because just to be like sitting here and talking about my own biography. But as you alluded to earlier, I think things that we have done in our work and the process of getting to where we are men, like all the Tibetan physicians here practicing in the US and North America, I think it will help our listeners or other people who are interested about Tibetan medicine or looking at the route that we took. Having said that, I should actually mention that when it was only last couple of years when I was in Menzinkang, I had the clinical research department. At that time, we didn't really get to do much more work, and most of the projects that you alluded to earlier were actually, most of them were almost getting initiated or being already initiated when I was just a freshly minted Tibetan doctor. And it was in late 90s, if I could remember correctly, in 99 or 2000. And Dr. Namgyal Kusar, who both of us know quite well, in hindsight, I could see that he fought nails and tooth to try to convince the Menzinkang administration and other doctors to buy them into doing a clinical research studies. And all the projects that we were doing at that time were very much focused on chronic / lifestyle illnesses. for which over the course of time, people, both Tibetan doctors or Western doctors or researchers, have believed in some way that Tibetan medicine seem to be way more effective in addressing chronic health issues, which I think it's not necessarily true, because now we're seeing, especially in the situation where the COVID-19 is spreading rampantly, and then we're seeing the effectiveness of Tibetan medicine. So that's an aside. But those, at that time, suddenly I was extremely excited being involved in all those projects. And if I look back now retrospectively, I could say that it was not only being excited about the fact that we were able to do those studies, but also those are some of the key or important things that happened at Menzika in terms of not only initiating a research or trying to reevaluate Tibetan medicine effectiveness, but also to kind of encourage our doctors to look at Tibetan medicine from fresh eyes. And I remember one thing that you asked, Tony, was about what were some of my favorite studies that we did at that time. And looking back, I can't instantly think about diabetes study we did at the time, because the result that we got out of the study was not only very significant, but also we had a chance to look at the mechanism of diabetes, especially we were looking at type 2 diabetes, diabetes mellitus at the time. And so both in Tibetan medicine as well as in mainstream Western medicine, that diabetes are usually related with someone who is obese or who haven't really taken much care of their lifestyle. And when we were looking at the data, there was quite a while ago, but even then in early 2000, we quickly realized that, wait a minute, it's not just that diabetes or type 2 diabetes are caused due to someone not being careful about their diet and lifestyle. It actually could be other way around too, because so many of our cases were actually, they were suddenly experiencing metabolic disorder, but most of them were on a leaner side. They were losing weight. Most of them were really underweight. And so we had to ask a question that is not only the improper lifestyle choices or dietary habits, and therefore leading to overweight and causing diabetes, but it could be other way around, that you have that metabolic disorder and therefore either you are gaining weight or losing weight. And I think I remember this thing.
Sorry to interrupt real quick.
Yeah.
Can you give a little introduction of the study design, how it was assessed, how you guys went about the study as well, just so that
Absolutely, yeah. And so when I got introduced to the study, as I mentioned earlier, Dr. Namdul and some of his key stakeholders at that time, they had designed the study almost to the T, because at that time what we had to do was just come in and go out in all these Menzika branch clinics and start collecting data. It was a randomized control study, but and single blinded study. So it was not double blind study, but single blind study. We had two arms, and one arm were certainly controlled arm where we were prescribing them the Tibetan medicine that we have selected, as well as advice on their lifestyle. Now the other, so that's the control, that's the control group, that's the test group. And then we have the control group where basically we have only, we will only give them a lifestyle advice, and we'll make sure that if they have any issues, then they're able to either withdraw or get other prescribed medicine we usually will give to diabetes patients. And so the study took almost 4 years at the time, because we wanted to make sure at least we have 6 months to follow these patients. What we found at that time, as I mentioned earlier, that the outcome was very, very encouraging, because other than having a relatively good control over both the fasting and the postprandial blood glucose or blood sugar, we saw at the time that the Tibetan medicine works really well in both in maintaining or to bringing down the level of A1C or HbA1c, people sometimes we would also call it a glycated hemoglobin, and which in the field of endocrinology or people who are in the treatment or study of diabetes would say that having a well-maintained or well-managed HbA1c would delay the onset of complications associated with diabetes. And we were really excited at that time. As I mentioned earlier, I didn't know how important that was at that time. We were excited, and we suddenly published our study at that time. And also the other important thing that happened at the time was our collaborators at the All India Institute of Medical Sciences. Primarily, there were two doctors at the time, Dr. Ajay Sood and Dr. Ravinder Pandey. And it was really helpful as well as effective for us to have two of them as our main collaborators, because Dr. Ajay Sood came from endocrinology department. At that time, he was the acting head of that department. And then we had Dr. Pandey, who was the director of biostatistic department. And so we had these two perfect collaborators, and working with us with Dr. Namgyal Kusar, and at that time there was Dr. Namgyal Tenzin and a few other doctors. So we had this really well-balanced team to work on that study. And so it was really exciting at the time. I really feel that we could have done an excellent follow-up study, just looking at where we scored most in terms of, as I mentioned earlier, like in controlling and maintaining the HbA1c. Unfortunately, due to varied reasons, we were not able to do that follow-up study, but I think that was really significant at that time.
I think what's also so exciting with that too, right, is that, and from what I'm hearing, is that the constitution of the individual was not necessarily taken into a consideration when given the medicine. So the medicines weren't necessarily tailored personally to that individual patient. So even without that aspect of Tibet medicine's repertoire, you guys were able to get such a fantastic outcome.
It was, certainly I remember before we published our study, I remember vividly sitting down with people from All India Institute of Medical Sciences, and Dr. Ajay Sood and two of his colleagues were sitting in his office. And when I entered the room, his office, he was just so excited for us, for Tibetan medicine. He came up and just wrapped me into his arms. He was like, Tenzin, we got something here. And they gave Menzikan, Tibetan medicine, and people from our clinical research department full credit because they worked extremely hard for all these years, 3.5 or 4 years at that time in India. And also it's key thing that, Tony, you mentioned about the constitutionally based tailored treatment, because at that time, we didn't have any of those things factored in, because certainly it was hard. It was one of the first well-designed systematic study that we were trying to do on Tibetan, clinical study do on Tibetan medicine at that time. And so there were so many other things that we need to look at, particularly, as I mentioned earlier, Dr. Namgyal Kusar and all the other people were looking at. We were just coming in and kind of doing what we were expected and directed to do at that time. But the fact that we saw a significant number of people on the other side of the weight scale, like the underweight, and how actually some of those complications we were seeing in the early stage of our study, like people who were having more ketones or blood sugar in the urine sample, right? When we had to use the dipstick to check that. But then there are other people who are actually on the underweight side. They were having more complication associated with the eyesight. They were reporting issues related to burning sensation in the eyes, not being able to see clearly, blurry vision. And I think certainly, as I alluded to earlier, doing a follow-up study where we can play in a bit of those constitutionally, separated group of study participants, I think it will be way more effective. But those were in our heads at that time, but we didn't really get to do that.
That'll be another evolution at some point as well.
I believe so, yeah.
You mentioned that Dr. Namgyal Kusala had a lot of trouble kind of convincing the administration the value of the research, how to do it. Can you talk a little bit about that dynamic? And I've heard you also talk about all that your team did to help kind of work with Amshi Tibetan physicians all throughout settlement clinics, branch clinics, to help them learn research methods, right? And how to participate in a research study when was so new.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, as I mentioned earlier again, uh, I I didn't know much at all when I first got into uh, as a team for the diabetes study we were doing at that time. But then I remember the study went for much longer than we anticipated. And over the course of time, I realized that there were so many other things happening on the ground, especially in terms of how people up at the clinical research department, like someone like Dr. Namdul Kusar and his colleagues, were working so hard to make sure that the study kept going at that time. And I think one of the things I quickly realized at the time was, and not to blame anyone or say that it was not the correct way to do it at that time, but senior doctors at the time were suddenly feeling the heat in terms of, if anything disproves the hypothesis that were brought into the study, that Tibetan medicine either could be or could not be effective for treating or managing someone with diabetes, right? And so that was the one thing. The other thing was also that everything is in the text and it has been practiced for thousands of years, and why we would need this kind of work to be done. And I think it was very similar to what happened also when, as an aside info, when the science education was initially introduced at all the Tibetan monastic universities, at least a decade ago, when someone like His Holiness the Dalai Lama really made sure that it's being introduced there, and there were senior monks who were not necessarily pleased with that introduction. And even just a few years ago, when I was in South India, they have a similar kind of mixed feelings about why science has been introduced. So I think at Mexico, suddenly there was in late 90s and then in early 2000, things were quite hard. But once we started to get a sense of what we are really looking at and what's our motive or intention behind doing that study, very quickly the research department was able to have most of our senior doctors, I should say, buy into the fact that doing a clinical research like that was very critical. And once I think everyone came on board, I remember every 6 months I was a field coordinator, and then after one of our doctors left, I acted as a project coordinator, and I had to travel all around India to our branch clinics where we were collecting data. And it was really not like I going down there and trying to tell them what we need to do, how we need to collect data. It was really a trial and error process all through our work, because they were like, oh, we were able to do this, but it wasn't really working that well. And so we thought maybe we should do this. And actually, when I brought those things to the table, going back to AIMS doctors and statisticians, they were like, wow, this is great. We should do that, because we haven't really done any study on medical system like Tibetan medicine. And it really worked out well in terms of looking at the prospects and challenges of initiating or designing and conducting a study on Tibetan medicine. So that worked out really well.
Well, that's fantastic. Well, that's a really great segue, I think, to also just hearing. So coming into Mensikang, having research be such a new aspect of the field, what was it that brought you into research? And before that, what kind of brought you into Tibetan medicine initially? Was it research and this idea of research that made you pursue a Tibetan medical career? Or did you want to be primarily a clinician, and how did that evolve? I'd love to hear.
Oh, yeah, I love the question, because I constantly get asked by people when I travel around, especially outside Tibetan community, like what made me go to Tibetan medical school, study Tibetan medicine. And most of the time people expect to hear some really interesting and soul-searching endeavor from my side to get into medical school, but it actually didn't happen that way because it was actually by default. I ended up being at Menzikan Tibetan Medical School. I was one thing was sure, I was always eager from my very early schooling that I wanted to go into medical field, and so when I was in I think sophomore and junior year of high school, I was really trying to go to at the school I went to. We didn't have a science stream at that time, so I was really trying to go to other Tibetan school where I can go and get into science stream. In India, we have this British education system where from the high school itself, we need to determine which stream we wanted to go. And to cut the long story short, when I got into Menzikan, I got there because in order to go to study Western medicine, there were no any resources at all. I had to find ways to get some way where I can study medicine. And first year studying Tibetan medicine, I had my own personal health issue, and I wasn't really sure where I should go. And for some reason, I told myself intuitively, that was my intuition at the time, that I should first give Tibetan medicine a chance because I'm studying here, for God's sake, at that time. And then so I went to Tibetan doctor, and the doctor was a lady doctor. Within a couple of days, she just treated me like anything. I wasn't even expecting anything like that. And so that was really the seed of making me not only excited about studying Tibetan medicine, but also a deep sense of inquiry to trying to know why it was so effective and why I haven't known about Tibetan medicine for all this time, because we don't really have that access to Tibetan medicine when I was in high school. And after I graduated, I had a chance to be part of all these researches that Menzikan was doing, and one of them diabetes, and we did cancer right after the study of diabetes. And it really helped me not only to get a better sense of Tibetan medicine, its effectiveness, how it relates to the Tibetan bigger cultural knowledge under that umbrella. But it also really helped me to communicate and to connect to people from other disciplines of medicine and researchers and scholars. So it had really helped me, not only as a Tibetan practitioner, but also as someone who's interested in research.
And at that time, I mean, His Holiness the Dalai Lama has been such a purporter of research and of collaborations with scientists. When you were just starting in your first year of Menzikan, was he talking about this? Was that influential also to your ideas of what the possibilities were at Tibetan medicine, or at least in medicine, and understanding greater connections with science at the time, or not as much?
Well, to be honest, I mean, now looking back, we could see that, I mean, when I was in late years of studying Tibetan medicine into third or fourth year of studying, then I suddenly have heard a lot about how His Holiness have been emphasizing on focusing on initiating and conducting a research in Tibetan medicine, and then collaborating with other medical systems, not just the conventional Western medicine, but also other traditional medical systems like Ayurveda, Chinese medicine, Unani. But before coming to Menzikan, I had no clue. And also when I was at Menzikan Medical School, Dr. Kusar and others were already working on research, and I'm sure they have been inspired and encouraged by someone like His Holiness is to really accentuate the importance of doing a research and taking the Tibetan medicine as a discipline, as a medical practice further. But again, I think, as I was mentioning earlier about the benefit of being able to communicate with other discipline, medical system and researchers via research. I actually want, if I may, I wanted to know a bit about your own academic work and research, Tony, because I mean, as I said before, it's a bit weird just me sitting here talking about all my biography. But I've always wondered about the impact of Tibetan medicine as a system that's so influenced by Buddhist philosophy and psychology. And for someone like you, it's really interesting in terms of you have come from completely different culture. And as much as most of us know, you are one and the only non-Tibetan who has been trained in a very traditional way of teaching or training someone in Western medicine, and then you, on top of that, you are a Western scientist, both in looking at both the biology and cultural aspects of Western science. And I'm really eager to know how you, having been trained in these two very diverse knowledge and medical practice and research from different system, how it has impacted you. And I really am looking more from the perspective of you, rather than just intellectual and research work, but as a person, how it impacted you, the way you look at actually your own body, your health and well-being, and then of course your relationship to others around you. So could you share a bit about that with us?
Wow, thank you, Tenzin. That's a that's a huge question and really wonderful. Yeah, I think growing up, so I for the first 3 years of my life growing up in South Korea and seeing different ways of understanding the body, different ways of approaching it, I think I always assume that different cultures have a unique perspective on health and well-being. And I think coming back to Colorado after we left South Korea and seeing how in Colorado it's a very active population. People are up in high altitude, people are out using their bodies, generally kind of healthy orientation. And then I would go to where my father lived in Miami and see a really different perspective of living. And I think seeing that, yeah, different cultures have such such profound insight to offer how we live and how we can be well and happy. And I think that we have Native American background. So I think I always connected to a philosophy that was more connected to the land. And in my own mind, I wouldn't have called it Buddhist because I didn't know much about Buddhism at that point. But I guess I always assumed that by understanding the natural world, by investigating how social, like how people relate, we should be able to understand how to be well, how to be happy, how to be healthy. And I think, so when I was in high school, I had the opportunity to meet His Holiness. He came for a big peace conference in Colorado. And we had been studying that whole semester to kind of have the opportunity to meet him, all about peace studies and everything. And after all that preparation, I had so many questions I wanted to ask him. And yet meeting him, it was like all those questions evaporated from my mind, and it was his presence. It was this really amazing quality of presence that I encountered. And I just, it was almost like meeting someone you've known for your whole life. There was a quality, there was an authenticity, there was like a disarmament, and I wanted to know more. And so I think I started kind of reading a little bit more about Tibetan culture and Tibetan Buddhism, and in college, thinking I wanted to maybe like Palkyi also do kind of biology and neuroscience and be an astronaut and look at the body in extreme conditions. I thought I really wanted to see what a different traditional medical system had to offer about understanding the body. So I think after going through this whole process of going through the training, going through the Western science, I think to say that how it has impacted me personally, I think particularly what it offers is profound insight into our humanness, profound insight into the very constituents of what bring us well-being, what makes us happy, what makes us healthy. And I think in some ways it doesn't it almost seems common sense because it's so straightforward. It's like things that we know, that our mind affects our health, that our social relationships affect our health, that our environment and our relationship to our environment affect our health. But to have that so beautifully systematized, and I remember like when I started at Mensikong and I was like, oh my gosh, we have to memorize our textbook. And I was like, oh, I'm gonna like my mind's gonna dull over 5 years. and and I remember the process of doing it and the beauty of the poetics of the Gyushi and reciting it, and it became my favorite part. And I realized that it's drawing connections to all these things that make us healthy and well. How the seasons affect our bodies, how different foods affect our bodies, and it's an intensely reflexive experience. And so I think what I've come out of it really is this deep lifelong journey of our relationship to our bodies, our relationship to our mind, and that how Tibetan medicine, I feel like, provides this structure, right, of like going deeper and deeper and deeper and more and more profound. And I think on the science part, what excites me so much is how little we know and how much we can know, and that just having the authenticity to show up and ask these questions about our bodies, about our relationships, about the environment, all that helps bring about health, and that it's individual, that it's not a one recipe fits all, I think is so exciting. So I think that's the biggest part that I feel like has brought with me, is that it's both a very personal journey of reflection, and also an amazing um, uh, tool to see how that unfolds for other people and how it unfolds for relationships in our life. So I'd say that.
Well, I mean, it's so, Tony, if you don't mind, I actually want to bring this forward here, that so many people want to actually know that you're fluent in Tibetan, both written and spoken. We're doing this in English, mainly for the purpose of reaching out to young Tibetans as well as non-Tibetans who are interested in Tibetan medicine. And I'm actually intrigued when I first met you in terms of Tibetan language is something which is not really spoken much outside the Tibetan Buddhist community, right? And someone like you had taken pains for years to not only learn Tibetan language, not just to kind of be able to communicate with someone to help you and just to see a patient or being able to communicate some really basic thing, but you learn Tibetan language to an extent that you want to understand and know the kind of great impact of Tibetan medicine, Tibetan Buddhist culture. And then on top of that, you made a decision to go all the way to India and then to Tibet to study Tibetan medicine in its most, if I may use the term, like orthodox and traditional way of studying Tibetan medicine. So again, you alluded to that a little bit earlier, but tell us a little bit about why you actually made that such a huge decision and what factored into making decision to do some of those really, people might say, crazy things that you did.
Thank you, Tenzin. I think that's a great question. I think I did grow up really enjoying languages. I think maybe being exposed to Korean as a young kid, maybe I had a affinity towards, or I enjoyed languages. And I think one of the things that I loved about languages, particularly I studied French in high school, is that you get to see in other people's minds. That it's not just communicating, but you get to see their worlds, you get to see their cultures, you get to see how they think. And it's like entering a different universe, because it's the body language changes, how people relate to each other changes. And I think when I first went to India and I thought, oh, I want to study Tibetan medicine, and I think like many people, like to study in English and it should be translatable and no problem. And as I started reading more, everything that existed in English on Tibetan medicine, I was reading furiously, right? And as I started spending more time with Amchi in Dharamsala and having connections and realizing that it was just the tip of the iceberg, and it felt impenetrable in a way that and as I started learning more of the language and seeing how each term, even a term, has so much built within it, and that to translate that into English kind of collapses it and flattens the meaning in a way. And I realized that if I wanted to go in and go deep, I had to at least try. And I remember thinking that I thought I was pretty good at Tibetan for a few years. I had been studying Tibetan, I don't know, for 8 or 9 years by that point, or had been speaking it, and went to, Tibet University in Lhasa and was writing stuff, writing essays and all these things, and would listen to teaching. I was like, I'm pretty good at Tibetan. I'd try and do interviews. And I remember my friend Sanjay Tashi was like, Tawni, up until this point, you've just had like a toe in the water. And he's like, I'm going to push you in and see what it feels like. And I was like, oh, really? And I remember that year he just started like really kind of almost like Tibetan boot camp, like giving me essays to write every week. And I feel like it just opened my mind, where I was like reading novels, and I was like, oh my God, I had no idea I didn't know anything. And I think when I started, because when I first started learning Tibetan medicine, actually, Khenab Gyamtso was the vice principal of Mensikong at the time, and I was helping run an Emory semester there. And he's like, come up to my office, we'll do like an hour or two after the day, at the end of each day, and you can start learning. And he would, read it to me, we'd talk about it. And I really thought I started, I thought I understood it. And I remember he even came to Emory for his sabbatical, and I helped translate it for him in these classes. And I thought, oh, I have a good understanding. And when I started Mensikong and I started like memorizing it and having like really, really digging deep into the commentaries and all those things, and I was like, oh my God, I knew nothing, right? And it's just like the way that, I don't know, I feel like the educational system itself is a personal training. It develops you as a person. It develops your concentration, your focus through the memorization, that learning the text in that way, you start to see the relationships across the text. You start to see the relationship with the clinic. You start to see when you're going out on medicinal plants, like things start connecting and unveiling, and it's like a whole experience. And I realized that education systems are not necessarily, they're quite different, and they're quite cultural. And I think without the language, I don't think that universe would even be remotely accessible. And I just feel really grateful that I had the opportunity of really amazing teachers that told me Tibetan language was easy, and that was not true.
So yeah, just to quickly follow up on what you were saying, and all of this is so interesting, and I just told myself, okay, there's one question would just stem up in my mind I really should ask you, because talking about language, especially within our, like in most of the immigrant community, right, and more so in Tibetan community, we constantly engage in debate about the importance of not only being a bilingual or knowing more than 2 languages, but then to have an environment that our younger Tibetans could be exposed to Tibetan language. And then I saw this very interesting quote from a Greek philosopher saying, to have a second language is to have a second soul. I'm just interested about, so for you, someone like with English and then the Tibetan language, and then the diving deep into this culture, did you have any similar impact? Because for us, it's hard to experience that because we are just very much in that forest, so to speak.
Then I'm going to turn the question back on you. Yeah, I mean, I feel like I don't think I realized it until many years later. But I had people tell me that when I would be speaking Tibetan, that I looked like kind of a different person. Like my body language was different, my tone was different, my mannerisms were really different. And I do feel that very much so. I feel like it's like a whole other identity in a way, that is in this fabric of that culture, right? And is this fabric, and I feel like how you express, how you relate, has an aspect of a different soul, or it has a different resonance, I guess, so to speak. And I'd love to hear your response to that question.
Yeah, I mean, I see, as I mentioned earlier, it has only been the last couple of years that I started to kind of introspect on that aspect, because I think especially like coming here to the US and then more so in getting into graduate program or graduate school, where we have to, as you are very much aware, that how much readings that we need to do, and then to make the sense of what we glean from those readings, and then to use those readings to frame our own research questions or things that we want to know at more depth. And I realized that when I would read all those stuff in English, right? I mean, certainly all those books and literature out there, but then it helps me to then think over again those content of those readings that I've done in Tibetan. And it really helps me to not only get a better sense of what I have absorbed or metabolized, but it helped me to turn around and ask a very different question that I would ask if I was just thinking in terms of the language in which I have read. And so I think, and I can't really, I mean, when I saw that quote about having a second language, like having a second soul, I think there's so many things that we can talk about, but a very kind of a straightforward example, like I mentioned earlier, which both of us can actually relate to, I thought is so interesting. And so I tried to share that with some of my Tibetan friends, but like, it's so not only helpful for your own understanding of intellectual inquiry, but it seems like there are lots of other health and mental benefit one can get if someone has that additional language, symbolic medium, right, to both to express and digest whatever we are being exposed to out there in the world.
Absolutely. And I think that segues really beautifully. I mean, not only language, but I think, I mean, it's it's an understatement to say that you took this entire endeavor of training into a massively rigorous, completely other education system. So I'm going to ask this question that has many other questions nested into it, but I think it's important because I think a lot of our young Tibetan doctors that are watching this, but also Tibetan youth, I think this is really relevant because many of them are asking kind of questions similar to yours, and where you were when you were entering Mensikang and kind of before, but as you were at the height of your career. And so I'm just interested in, it's just this incredibly bright, young, talented doctor who had already had just amazing, fantastic members like Lamimba Amchi Tamden, the great esteemed Amchi Pema Dorji. You had traveled all over Europe. You had seen patients all over East Africa and Kenya. You had led research collaborations and worked with Dr. Mim Cameron there at University of Minnesota, bringing Western students to Mensikang to learn Tibetan medicine, also doing research across the physicians at Mensikang and in the US. And so in many ways, there was no need to do anything else, right? You were doing incredible work, kind of at the top of your career. And you took all of that and you moved west and started from almost like square one, like from your bachelor's degree, right? You were an esteemed physician and doing incredible work. And so starting from the very, very beginning of the bachelor's degree and all the way through master's and PhD, and an incredibly long trajectory. So I'm curious kind of what what was that impulse to do that? And did you know what you were in for? Was part of one of the questions. Did you know you're going to go for the next 11 years of your life or so? And to finally complete your PhD. And so I'm interested in what did you envision this training would give you? And as now that you've gone through it, do you feel like you got what you set out for? And what were some of the surprises along the way? What gains did you receive that you didn't expect? Or maybe what did you expect to get and maybe it changed? So just really, so this, here's the other soul in many ways, the cultivation of the other soul.
Thank you. I should make sure to point out here that thanks for all the kind words though, but most of them were not true because I was certainly not on top of my game when I was at Menzica before I moved to the US 10 years ago. It's almost like, running into 10 years. And it, I think at that time, certainly I made a decision, I think in mid 2008, that I really need to do something or make a drastic, difficult decision to fulfill what I really wanted to do at that time. And I guess at that time, now in hindsight, I could say that I was really trying to find my own niche in order to not only show the effectiveness of Tibetan medicine, but also to make it more accessible to the larger community, to the wider population. And I think I remember my last 2 years at Menzica as the head of, at that time, it wasn't that I'd done something really worthy thing in terms of promoting and advocating for Tibetan medicine. But at that time, it just happened that we didn't have a senior Amji or doctor to come and be the director of the research department. And then I guess everyone thought that, okay, he should be the one. And so while I was heading the clinical research department, I realized strongly my own limitation. I was like, there's so much potential out in there, but I wasn't equipped enough to sit with other stakeholders or collaborators and come up with a right research question, come up with something that we can really sit together, wrap our mind around that particular thing and design a study that could really help Tibetan medicine as well as our patients. So I was really playing with idea of, getting a formal training in designing and conducting scientific research in Tibetan medicine. And then in 2008, our joint project between the University of Wisconsin, and especially where you are, very well-known neuroscientist, Richie Davidson at that time, at the brain imaging lab, where he was actively working on looking at all these different contemplative practices, and Thuktam happened to be one of the studies which Richie was collaborating with His Holiness's private office or under the guidance of His Holiness and Menzica and Delek Hospital. And I had a chance to go and observe a senior monk who was in the state of Thuktam. And I mean, we don't have time to elaborate on what Thuktam is, but it's just that the senior monk at that time, who was the Ganden Tirumbuche, the hunted Ganden Tirumbuche, who was clinically dead, but he was laying there in meditation, whereby he was able to keep his body completely intact and no decomposition, sign of decomposition. And his body was every day was changing in terms of radiating more glows and fragrance that we had no clue where it was coming from. And that really made me think that, okay, I know nothing. I mean, early I was thinking I really need to study more of Western research methodology. And then in that time, it made me realize I don't even know much about my own culture. I need to study more. And this is something which has so much potential in helping not only the way we think about something like our mortality or death and dying, but also the way we care for people with terminal illnesses or people who are close to dying. And then most importantly, the way I could actually think about my own mortality. And so I made a decision. I think I made a first trip to the US in 2008, more as an exploratory trip to see, okay, if I could fit in and how things gonna work if I decide to move here. And I got an impression at that time. And then I was with my, if I may use the term, like primordial mentor in the US, Miriam Cameron, who everyone knows her as Mim, and her husband Mike. And we met with people here at the University of Minnesota, and I realized, oh, I could just come here and I could get into master's program to study clinical studies, how to do clinical studies. And it turned out when I finally came here in end of 2008 or early 2009, I realized that I won't be getting any credit transfer for what I've studied and done in India. So I ended up starting all over again as a freshman. But I think over the course of time, it really helped me now. I remember in my junior, my sophomore and junior year, I took these two courses. The first one I took was about the public health approach to death and dying. And then the next semester, very next semester, I took the anthropology of death and dying. And both of the time I realized that there's so much missing in there in terms of what I found and what I was, to my own limited capacity, was able to absorb what I saw in the monastery about that senior monk who was meditating, and the questions that I posed to all these other practitioners at the monastery at that time. And I was like, okay, I need to do something with this, how I can incorporate that aspects of cultural knowledge and ways of understanding death and dying into my further how do you say, development of intellectual and clinical research study. And I made my mind at the time that, okay, just getting a master's program might not be enough for me. I need to really get into a graduate program. And that was, in junior year, I made a decision. I really need to get into graduate program, whether into a school of public health, or in anthropology. And I realized once I got done, it's been a bumpy road all these years, but I realized that it has taught me so much in terms of how we can come up with some very important yet interesting questions that we can pose in the context of Tibetan medicine, where it has been practiced and studied for thousands of years, but still how we can come up with some questions that can really help us to get a better nuanced understanding of Tibetan medicine, and how we can then disseminate the information to the wider community. So yeah, it's a long answer, but I really felt like some of those key situations and experience that I had at that time when I was working at Mexico really translated so nicely into things that I wanted to do and was able to do once I moved here to the US.
Well, that's
but also I was, yeah, so we have Pekula here, but let's have a question from others. But if we don't have much questions, then I will listen to what Pekula has to say. Otherwise, I have one question left for Tony, which I really wanted to know. But then let's get to Pekula. Do we have any questions from listeners?
Yes, we've been receiving some, positive vibes from our viewers, and also a few questions from Rosa Maria and Kesang Punso. They kind of had a similar question in terms of how can students go to learn more about Tibetan medicine if they're not traditionally exposed to it a lot in their daily everyday lives, and are there study abroad opportunities, or how can they get more exposure?
Yeah, go ahead, Tony. I would start by saying that there are two ways of making an attempt to study Tibetan medicine, right? And one is the kind of a long and hard path, which if we're looking at not just at Tibetans or non-Tibetans, but someone like Tawni, who actually took the long and difficult path of, if you're coming from like place like the US, where someone is not really fully efficient in Tibetan language, written and spoken, it's always helpful to take years, I don't know how many hours, thousands of hours to really have that efficiency in Tibetan language, and thereby going to places like Tibetan Medical School in India, as well as their school in Varanasi, Tibetan higher education place, and then in the also in Tibet. But that's a long and hard path. But then also in the U.S. and in Europe, there are medical schools like the Shangshung Medical School, where it's again, it's. I'm not saying it's anything easy, but one doesn't necessarily might have to spend that number of time to gain efficiency in Tibetan language. But then that could also be extremely helpful for someone to study Tibetan medicine. Then in Europe and Italy, where Dr. Basam Yunten's Institute teaches Tibetan medicine. On top of that, there's a study abroad program now these days here at many higher education institutes in the US. And here at the University of Minnesota, we teach 2 courses of Tibetan medicine, and the first course is a prerequisite for the second one. The second one, what we usually do, and now due to COVID, we were not able to do this this summer, but typically we would take students to India, to Menzikai Tibetan Medical School, and be there for 3 weeks and have a chance to be taught by Tibetan doctors at the Menzikai. And so that's one program. The another program, which Tawni is very familiar with, is at Emory University, where they have a much longer program where students get to not only get a deeper understanding of Tibetan medicine from what they might have read or learned before, but they get exposed to all these different areas of Tibetan Buddhist culture. And so as far as I understand, there are 2 of these study abroad program available out there here in the US. Anything, Tawni, you have to add?
I was thinking, Palkyi, are the viewers also asking where they can maybe read information also about Tibetan medicine, maybe resources in English about Tibetan medicine?
Yeah, so it's kind of, they were interested in how they can learn more about it. So probably maybe any introductory books or resources like that, publications maybe.
So I think some of our classic books that have been already published, Amshiye Dunan, one of our great physicians, who his kind of life story and a lot of the teachings from that Mensikang has published the fundamentals of Tibetan medicine. And then Tenzin Namdul just came out with his book, Tibetan Medicine EU, with Dr. Cameron, and it is fantastic. So really, well, I'll let Dr. Namdul, you can introduce your book. It's fantastic.
I mean, I don't know if it's that fantastic, but we try to present some of the principal concepts and key components of Tibetan medicine in the book, and particularly we wanted to have some kind of resources which can act more like a textbook for students and other people who wanted to know more about Tibetan medicine. So that could be a good resource, as well as we have a bunch of information on Back-End Center at the University of Minnesota's website, where people can know more about, not only about Tibetan medicine, but also about Tibetan medicine consultation, how it works, and then about the way someone can recognize or identify their constitutional nature, because it's a big thing in Tibetan medicine. So there's a free constitutional self-assessment tool that anyone can get access to once you get onto the center's website. And many people and students have responded positively how much it has helped them. So yeah, maybe some of you out there can take a time to look at that and assess yourself.
Yeah,
That sounds great.
If any of the viewers are interested in more of the kind of research, also resources, we're happy to provide some of the, maybe a bibliography of some of the articles that have come out on different areas, from clinical work to pharmacology to more humanities and anthropological analyses. There's a lot of work that's been out. So I think from either a personal level or research level or professional level, we're able to offer some of those resources too.
Sounds great. And also, you know, one of the viewers was particularly interested in maybe having links to both of your past research, as well as maybe if you did have a bibliography, maybe to include your previous research. I think that'd be great. And another question we had was, how do you see the two modalities, Tibetan medicine, Western medicine, different and similar?
Go, Tawni. Okay. I mean, I'm sure Tawni has a ton of things to say about that, but let me just quickly begin by saying that one of the things which most of the students who would take Tibetan medicine, to my personal experience, would say that the way in Tibetan medicine we focus on the course and condition of any illness. Now, when we talk about illness, we're not just talking about any state of imbalance in the body, which shows when there's any disturbance in our pathological interpretation, right? Someone will go and do the blood work and they say, oh, you're diabetic, or you have something going on in your body. Only then people might think about body's imbalance or illness or disease form. But in Tibetan medicine, everything would start way before that. And so when we talk about the course and condition, it's really about from the very moment of when our body is being exposed to anything which might not be good to our body. And so the importance of focusing on course and condition in Tibetan medicine, there's a huge difference when we look at the kind of the disease model in Western medicine, when everything is so much focused not just on cell germs and all this other pathology that we need to keep our eyes on. In Tibetan medicine, we're just looking at, when we talk about the cause, there's something which can't we see and think about, and which are very much in the conventional knowledge, we would say metaphysical, right? And so in Tibetan medicine, everything is traced over to our mind. And so the behind the curtain, so to speak, or the intangible, or something that we can't see, is really the root cause of everything. So which is the mind. And it's interesting because sometimes it's hard to grapple with that particular understanding that everything starts out from our mind. But I think if both the caretakers and the beneficiaries or the patients can get some sense of that philosophy, then it gives patients so much more power and agency to take care of their own health and well-being, right? Because then when you're talking about mind, it's our mind. We are actually taking a step much before we are exposed to any of those pathologies or anything's out there in the environment. And I think that really helps. And also that it doesn't really make anything this or that, because it could be the etiology or the causative factor of mind, and we're looking at the pathological model that we see in the Western medicine. And it kind of works very effectively. And so that's something that, seeing the difference and then knowing how we can actually use them together in a very complementary manner, I think that's really helpful. That I always felt. But Tawni, yeah, if you have anything to add to.
Yeah, it's a great, absolutely. I just love to build on that. And I feel like this is such an exciting time, especially for all of our listeners who are in college, heading to college, going to graduate school, going to medical school, because it's like, this is a time when finally Western research is exploring things that I think in Tibetan medicine we've known, exactly like Tenzin said, for a long time, that we used to be so focused on the vector model of disease, right? That a pathogen comes in, hits us, right, and causes us to be illness, and we have to wipe it out and get it out, right? And we now realize that that our bodies are ecosystems, that we have rich ecosystems of microbiota, and that we have to maintain that, right? And that's part of that balance that we talk about in Tibetan medicine. And for example, Helicobacter pylori, H. pylori, as a vector for creating, right, ulcers and an idea, and then eventually cancers, right? We used to think this is the bad thing that we need to attack, and now we realize that it's just like a part of our natural microbiome in our gut that needs, like a predator in an ecosystem, needs to be there. And so when we can start realizing that we need to take care of our bodies and the other beings inside our bodies, and create balance, that what becomes exactly what Tenzin was saying, of the cause and the condition, right? It starts questioning that phenomena of, well, is it that we had a proliferation of this population in the gut that then became pathologic, right? Started causing illness? Or was it that we were so stressed out that our immune system dampened and then we became sick, right? So which one is the cause, right? We're starting to question that model in the Western perspective. And I think a lot of what we do at the Center for Healthy Minds here in Madison in psychoneuroimmunology is bringing that Western part to the picture to say, cancer progressions in patients is seeing the mind as such a big part of it, exactly what Tenzin was saying. And that from the Tibetan medical perspective, we can see that this has been a foundational principle. I think the other part that I would just add is that in pharmacology, I think similarly that we've had this model that you need to just purify to the one single compound, to then develop that into a medicine. And we know from Tibetan medicine that has the high likelihood of creating a lot of side effects and a lot of unwanted conditions. And so that's why Tibetan medicine brings in very, very complex formulas that allow the body to metabolize the formula well, to abate any of these side effects, to help focus the activity of the formula. And now we've known from a lot of the research on HIV cocktails that this is actually a model that is important for Western pharmacology too, that you get combinations that have a greater effect, a synergy, right, when you connect them, and it minimizes the selection for resistance. It minimizes the body's ability to mutate to make that medicine less effective. And yet this has been something that we've used in Tibetan medicine for a long time. So I just think you guys are going to be the next forefront of helping us see these connections and what we can contribute to people's well-being, right?
Yes, most definitely. And to everyone watching, thank you so much for your questions and all of your comments below. We really appreciate going through those. And so I guess since now we're kind of reaching our time boundary, if we would like to share any ways that our audience could get more involved with volunteering experience with Atma, I think maybe this would be a great time to bring that up.
Absolutely,
yeah. So if we could have the screen share, please, Jetsun.
I just want to also thank our wonderful volunteer, Jetsun Jungnae. She is going to be entering into UC Davis this fall as a freshman studying biology, and we've been really grateful to have all her support and help and excellent technical expertise. So part of what Jetsun will be sharing is, so this is Atma. This is the mission, again, that we presented in the beginning. to preserve, protect, and promote Tibetan medicine, its knowledge, practice, and ethics. And next slide, please. And so this is an opportunity similar to what Palkyi and Tenzin have been fantastic at helping and supporting us. We are offering volunteer opportunities for the duration of summer 2020. If you find yourself during the semester and have extra time, we would welcome volunteer time then too, but we realize that's probably not as likely. So we're looking for one more tech person and a website helper, and the website is managed through WordPress. Some help in marketing and social media, hosting, organizing different webinars, and by sponsoring we just mean kind of hosting it. This is for our introductory webinar series for Tibetan youth, young adults, collegiate, and the university community, and outreach, introducing Tibetan medicine to programs at your university, hosting talks, connecting it to Tibetan Asian studies departments, local libraries, research institutes. So helping kind of bring that into your university, your schools is a great opportunity. And we can also offer recommendation letters for those. We know that's important in the education. So this is our next upcoming session. This is Dr. Yambum. He's here in Madison, Wisconsin. He has his clinic here and also involved in research. And his session is August 22nd, and this is continuing with the conversations with Tibetan doctors, and so I'm sure there are going to be a lot of questions also coming for that session. And next slide. And this is the American Tibetan Medical Association website. Here's our email and our Facebook. And so if you would like to have, again, Tenzin and our research, a list of our research or any of the articles, bibliographies that you're interested in, please contact us through this email. And I just want to thank Dr. Tenzin Namdul for coming for this conversation. It's really fantastic to have you here. Palkyi for hosting, as always, so graceful and wonderful, and Jetson for your technical support, and to all of our viewers for joining us today. So thank you so much.